Hey guys, so long time no see. Usually I don't sit down and film a video like this. Normally I'm cleaning and doing a voiceover, but as you can probably tell from the title, this has been a major thing that has happened in our lives, and I have not posted in a long time, and so I figured that I would share our story. I figure you guys deserve to know what's been going on. You know, maybe not deserve, but I feel like sharing. A lot of you who follow me on Instagram know what's been happening and have been extremely supportive. I have not always been able to respond because this has been such like a taxing and emotional experience, traumatic experience, but seeing your messages truly helps me through some really dark times. So for those of you that follow me on Instagram and who would send those kind messages and still do to this day, you really matter. I don't want to already start crying. I'm literally already going to start crying, but you truly matter. You made a big difference in my life and me being able to keep going and care for my son. So I really appreciate that. But if you don't follow me on Instagram, you probably have no idea what has been going on. You can probably tell from the title of this video a little bit of what has happened, but we have had a very difficult thing happen in our lives. I thought that I would just start by kind of like summarizing what has gone on, and then I will go into, you know, more detail and just share the story with you guys. And you know, some parts of our story I feel like could maybe help others who have experienced some similar things. Carter's case is very unique, but parts of it I think other people have experienced as well, and maybe our insights on the situation could help you, or just even if you're facing any kind of, you know, difficult medical issues, I feel like I have some advice or just words of encouragement for that as well. But it's hard for me to talk about this because it has been so traumatic, and we're still we're not in the thick of it, but we're still going through it. We're not, you know, done with this. He still has another surgery in a couple months, so it's still very raw and real. I've actually only been home from the hospital for like, we went home on Thanksgiving Day, so it's been like a few days, and it was a transition for sure. So quick overview of what has happened. We were in the hospital for 7 weeks about. My son, Carter, who is 14 years old. I have, if you are new here, I am married and I have 4 kids, ages 14, 5, 3, and 1. So a bunch of really little ones and then a teenager. And so I have toddlers and a teenager. It's interesting. But my teenager, the 14-year-old, he had 4 surgeries in the span of 2.5 weeks. The first surgery was a failed surgery. He had 18% of his intestines bypassed. He had a ton of scar tissue. He basically had a bowel obstruction caused by gastroschisis when he was a baby, which means when he was a baby, he was born with his intestines outside of his body. And so they had to just kind of shove his intestines back in, and that caused a ton of scar tissue. He actually only had 2 surgeries when he was a baby. One when he was first born to put like half of it in, then they put a bag on it, and 3 weeks later they put the rest back in. He was in the NICU for like 5 weeks. Then he came home and we worked with like physical therapy and things like that for like a year or 2. But he was fine. Like, he was totally fine. He didn't have any more surgeries after that, and he was literally fine, 0 issues until 14 years later, which just blows my mind and breaks my heart because I genuinely thought we were past the gastroschisis issues, but we were not. Oh, and before I get into like everything that happened, I do want to say that I hope to post videos again on this channel, but they might be a little bit different. This one is obviously very different because I'm sitting down chatting with you guys, just kind of sharing our story to let you know what's been going on in our lives and what's going to continue to go on because we are not past this yet. But I do want to post videos like cleaning, inspiring type videos in the future. I just don't know exactly what those will look like. I kind of imagine them being like get it all done type videos, maybe a little bit more vlog style. I just don't have the time to spend like 12 hours editing a video like I would do before with my cleaning videos. Carter requires a lot of care, and then I also have a bunch of little ones. So I would still like to keep posting videos, but they're just gonna have to be a little bit different. And but I still love YouTube. I love sharing with you guys. I really appreciate all of you that watch my videos. It means the world to me. So yeah, that's just kind of an update on my channel. Let me know any types of videos you guys might want to see, or if you'll be interested in get it all done, maybe slightly vlog style type videos that are still inspiring. You know, Carter requires a lot of care, and so I can kind of share about that in those videos. And then also, I still am a mom that needs to clean and take care of her young kids and all of that. So let me know what you guys think about that. And then also, before I get started, by the way, I'm drinking a coffee from Dunkin', a iced vanilla latte. Delicious. But also, before I get into this, I just wanted to mention that I will have our GoFundMe linked down below. As you guys can imagine, I have had to completely quit working, just completely stop, and that means my income stops. My husband has continued to work, but his hours have been cut way back because of childcare during this time. So it has been a hardship on our family. So if you are willing or able to, or able and willing, or feel led, I will have our GoFundMe linked down below, but of course don't feel obligated at all. So just thought I would mention that. So all of that scar tissue from his gastroschisis is what, combined with a really, really bad stomach bug that had lasted like a week and a half, is what irritated his bowels and caused a bowel obstruction. So this bowel obstruction, we, at the first hospital, which I'll go into more detail, this is just kind of like an overview. We had the failed surgery, then we transferred to another hospital, and he had 3 more surgeries. All of his surgeries combined totaled 25 hours. The longest single surgery was 13 hours, which was the longest 13 hours of my life. I was crying almost the entire time. It was his second surgery, so it was after his failed surgery. Oh, it's gonna be hard to get through this. But it was a scary, scary, scary time. And they had told us he would be in surgery for like 3 hours, and it ended up being 13 hours. So, and then he wasn't done. He ended up in the ICU, and they had to bypass 18% of his intestines. They were not able to completely put his intestines back together. So after all these mini surgeries and being in the ICU and everything, his last surgery that he had, currently his 4th surgery, they were not able to put his intestines back together because of how swollen and inflamed and agitated that they were. So they had to give him an ileostomy, which is, a lot of people are probably more familiar with colostomies, like the colon, but this is an ileostomy, which has a lot more output and can be more difficult to deal with. So he has an ostomy, and then he also has a mucus fistula, this like tube. And so basically those are the 2 parts. They're on either ends of his stomach. Well, not opposite ends. They're kind of like this. And they are where hopefully they will reverse this. It's supposed to be 3 months after his last surgery. It's actually already been a month since his last surgery, which is crazy. So we have 2 more months to go when they will hopefully put it back together. But we had weeks and weeks of struggling with the ostomy bag, and then we are now having to do refeeding, which means we take the output from his ostomy bag and we put it in a pump that pumps it into the mucus fistula, the tube, so that it can go through the rest of his intestines and come out normally. And this allows him to get more nutrients, because you get a lot of nutrients from your intestines, and he's only getting about halfway if we just do it with the ileostomy. It keeps the rest of his intestines healthier, since they're actually being used in everything as well. So yeah, he has a lot of care now for the next 2 months until, Lord willing, they're able to reverse the ostomy, put his intestines back together, and, you know, things get moving again. So we will be back in the hospital, which is hard to think about because we just left and we were there for so long, and I had to just leave my young children, and it was the hardest thing in my life. And they're too young to understand now, but I hope someday that they will know that I would do it for each and every one of them in a heartbeat. Carter became the most important person in our family when this happened to him, and I had to be there for him. Thank God my husband is amazing and his family's amazing, and they kind of took over caring for the young kids, and then my family took over like bringing us food and like caring for us. And so our families have all come together, friends have come together. Kind messages from you guys, people donating to our GoFundMe. We have been truly blessed despite this experience. So yeah, that's kind of what's been going on. That's like an overview, but I thought I would tell you guys like the whole story from the beginning as much as I can remember. It's a very long story and I have written out a bunch of it, but I think that's too long for a YouTube video. So I'm just going to go by memory, not try to go by notes, and just kind of share with you guys some of what happened, you know, a little bit more detail and just kind of my feelings throughout it all. And Carter is actually a fantastic writer, and I want him to like write a short story or a book about this someday. He has already written in his notes like little stories about what has happened. His was like early on that he was writing about it, because after that he was in the ICU, he was sedated, which I'll share about that in a minute. So he wasn't all with it, you know, but, so it's kind of sad because he read to me what he wrote, and it was after the first surgery, which was the failed surgery. So now another sip of my iced coffee, and we're going to get through this, guys. I mean, we have amazing surgeons. We had amazing nurses who cared for us so well and became some of our really good friends and people that we love so much. They gave us like two of our favorite nurses gave us all this Astros World Series gear shortly before we left, because they know how much of a big fan Carter is of the Astros, and we actually watched the World Series, all of that. I watched even like before the World Series, all of that, like during Carter's surgery, I was watching the Astros, and then once, like during his 13-hour surgery, one of the games was. And then once he was out of the ICU and awake and stuff, that's when the World Series was. So we watched that in the hospital, and I was so thankful that they won. Oh my, like I kept being like, the few games they lost, I was like, don't they know there are kids in the hospital who are like depending on them? Like Carter would have been crushed, and I was so glad that they won. But anyway, so we have been extremely blessed all around by all the people and God and everything, but it has been really, really hard too. So how it all began, it was October 7th at 4 a.m. Carter woke me up and said he was having extreme stomach pain. And Carter, bless him, he is so sweet. He did not want to wake me up. He was very like fearful of waking me up. He didn't want to bother me, which just kills me. I feel horrible about that. I'm like, wake me up. If you're in extreme pain, wake me up, you know, which he did eventually. And, you know, he had had a stomach bug, and I just thought, oh, this is probably like a virus, like you'll be fine, you know, which it's crazy to look back and think like, no, Madison, he's not gonna be like, it's not fine, you know, but I just didn't know, you know. And so I tried to sit with him. He threw up a couple times, and I thought, oh, you know, once he throws up, he'll feel better, but he didn't. I called my sister, who's a nurse, and at 4 in the morning, I called her, which, bless her, she has been amazing and instrumental to my mental health and supporting me throughout this whole time. So thank you, Courtney. I love you so much. But she could hear Carter moaning and groaning in the background, and she was like, y'all need to go to the ER, like something's wrong. And I still didn't want to believe it. I just kept thinking, oh, it's a virus. So we waited 3 hours. We waited until 7 a.m., a little bit before 7 a.m., so I guess a little bit less than 3 hours, to go to his regular pediatrician, because that's when they open. So I thought, oh, we'll just go there. You know, this is just a really bad stomach bug. So we get there, he's literally like hunched over in pain. Like, I don't know what I was thinking taking him there, but the second we walk in, they're like, you need to go to the ER. They're not equipped here. They're going to want to do a scan. There are things they're going to want to do. You need to go to the ER. So I was like, all right, let's go. So we went to the ER, and it was similar with that. We walked in, they saw him hunched over in pain, and they immediately let us in. We didn't even have to wait, which was a blessing. And they immediately brought in this like ultrasound machine, and they said, oh, maybe he has like appendicitis, which to me was very scary at the time. Now I know that that would have been way less of an issue. I mean, depending, you know, if it had bursted or something, that would be way worse. But ironically, his cousin ended up having appendicitis a few weeks after Carter's ordeal, and it was like not that big of a deal for him. He had to have surgery and everything, but it was nowhere. He was home the next day, you know. So, you know, hindsight again, it's 2020. I would have loved it to have just been that. But it wasn't. So they thought it might be. So they said, let's get you in for a CAT scan. So they gave him morphine, which they asked me for permission for that. And they were like, if it was my kid, I would give him morphine. And so I was like, okay, give him the morphine. He's in extreme pain, you know. So they gave him morphine and we went to the CAT scan. And at this point, Carter's pain had gone down. You know, we were kind of joking and laughing. He was kind of, you know, acting funny with the morphine. And we just had no idea what was coming. He did the CAT scan, and then we went back to the room and waited not that long, and they came back and they were like, he doesn't have appendicitis. And I was like, oh, good. And then she said, but he has a small bowel obstruction. And from that moment on, it was just chaos, basically. So they had to, one of the, not the hardest things, but something that was very hard to do. They were starting to wheel us to like a room to stay the night and then possibly have surgery. And they told us multiple times that he might have surgery, might not. Oh, he doesn't need surgery. Oh, he does. Oh, he doesn't. Oh, he does. This was all over like, because he ended up having surgery the next day. So it was just like, you know, a night and a day, but it was very back and forth. But as they were wheelchairing him to his room, they're like, wait, you need to put the NG tube in. And the nurse was like not happy about that, which made us uncomfortable. Looking back, I'm like, she did not handle that well. But she brought this tube, just this like, which we'd never heard of an NG tube before. She brought this tube and she was like, all right, they had done a COVID test and she was like, this is worse than the COVID test. Like, it's way worse. But they had to put the tube through his nose, down his throat, into his stomach while he's wide awake. So she tried doing it and it was like, no, not gonna happen. So then she comes back with this man who's humongous, like so tall, like obviously I'm like, oh, the second I saw him I was like, oh no, they're gonna hold him down and do this. But the doctor came in and she was like, look, you have to have this, you know, if you swallow, like as we're putting it down, it's going to be less painful. Otherwise, we can just hold you down and do it. And I told Carter, I was like, Carter, sometimes with medical things, like I remember with my C-sections being really fearful, you just have to let them take you and do what they need to do to take care of you. And this is that. And he was so brave. And he said, okay, and he did it without them having to hold him down. I was just yelling, swallow, 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 as they put this tube down. And it was way too big, which we learned when we went transferred to the med center. That tube was way too big, unnecessarily big. But they got it down. And then that wasn't even necessarily the worst part, because he had to have that tube for a very long period of time. Like it ended up being weeks with that NG tube in. And it's miserable. It just sits on your larynx. I think that's what they call it. He wouldn't even speak. He would have to like either type things out on his phone or make hand motions, and he would get really frustrated with me because I wouldn't be like with it enough to understand what he was trying to say. But it was extremely painful. And the one they put in at that first hospital was huge. It caused like, you know, scabs all around his nose because it was so big, and they didn't tape it properly down like they ended up doing in the med center. And so his, like the tube would just move, and anytime it moved, it was like very painful. So that was pretty miserable. But why they had to do that was to get all that bile. So basically, since he had a small bowel obstruction, nothing could go through. Like everything had stopped going through. So, even if you're not eating or drinking, there's still like, acids and things in your stomach and bile, basically. So they had to suction that out. Otherwise, he would be constantly nauseous and constantly throwing up bile, and it would just be heavier and heavier on his intestines and could cause more bowel obstructions and just not be good. So that's what they had to do. They had to connect it to a pump, and it would suction out his bile like all day long. Which was very reminiscent of, he had one of those little tubes when he had gastroschisis. And I remembered seeing the bile when I would visit him in the NICU. And yeah, so it's kind of crazy, to have that happening to us again. So basically they put that tube in, and they said like 90% of the time the obstruction will work its way out on its own, with the NG tube helping, and he won't need surgery. So I really thought he's not going to need surgery. Like, just from the way they were saying things, I was like, he's not going to need surgery. It's going to be fine. So, some of my family members, or no, I think I went home. My dad came and stayed with Carter or something. I went home, got my stuff, stayed the night. They were back and forth. Finally, in the morning, it was just like a split second. He's going into surgery. He has to have surgery like now, like emergency surgery. And so it was very shocking to me and Carter, because we really didn't think it was going to happen. And he was in that surgery for like 3 hours, and I thought that was hard. I thought that 3 hours was really hard, but I tried to stay calm, and I tried to stay strong for Carter. And, when you're in the hospital, you are constantly having to advocate. You have to fight. Listen to me when I say this. You have the absolute right to fight for your loved one, or yourself, if that's the situation you're in. You don't have anyone else to fight for you, or yourself. You have the right, and it's honestly in your best interest and necessary to fight for your loved one. So I think that if you're not in the medical field, you can feel like these doctors are gods, or they know everything, and they obviously know way more than you, so why should you question them or whatever? No, you know your loved one, especially if you go on a long journey with them in the medical field. You are the historian. You know there's a lot of communication breakdowns that go on between doctors, different doctors, nurses, things like that. So you are so important for your loved one, or for yourself and your own health. So anyway, I just wanted to say that, because that is a lesson that I had to learn, is that I was fighting for my son's life. Of course, we had I'm not saying that I performed the surgery. We had an amazing surgeon who did that. But, I played a big role, and she would agree that. There's my little ones going out on a little walk with their dad, so my husband. So my surgeon would say that I was very important and know a whole bunch more about my son's case than most of the medical team there, because I have been there from the beginning and everything. So yeah, basically, he had that surgery. And they said it worked. They did call me once during the surgery, which was terrifying to me, but they just wanted my approval to remove his appendix, which I did approve. Your appendix is kind of pointless. They're not even sure why you really have it, and it can just cause issues like appendicitis. And where his was located, it could be hidden and people could miss it. And so I was like, yeah, get rid of that thing. Like, we don't want another thing to have to worry about. Get rid of it. So I was happy about that. That was one good thing that came from that surgery, but that was about it. They did say the bowel obstruction had been removed. And so then they were like, okay, now it's just time to wait for his intestines to get moving again, which can take some time. Well, we waited and we waited and we waited for days. He had the NG tube in, and he was miserable, and he wanted that thing out. So the surgeon, who I thought was taking care of us and I thought was doing a good job and was telling him how grateful I was to him, he finally just randomly decided to take out his NG tube. And that's another thing I will say is, make sure, like, if you feel like they're doing something that's rushed and doesn't make sense, you have a right to say, stop what you're doing. Or maybe the nurse is doing something that you think is not working or whatever. Say, stop. I need you to stop what you're doing. Let's think about this. Let's talk about this, whatever. So I wish I would have done that, but I didn't know back then. He just was like randomly like, let's just take it out. And so, you know, of course, Carter's very happy. I was excited. I was like, okay, we're taking it out. You know, even though I was worried because his bowels he had a couple bowel movements. But it felt very rushed and sudden. And so he took it out, which is kind of crazy. I have a video of that, which I won't post, but, pulled it out of his nose. They just pull it out. And, after a few days of that, he got more nauseous and more nauseous, started throwing up bile, at least once a day. Didn't want to admit that he was nauseous because he didn't want the tube back in, the poor baby. And it was just not working. And at this point, he had not eaten or drank anything in almost 10 days. He did have some, you know, like electrolytes or IV fluids going, but they do not automatically give you TPN, is what they call it, which is like the main nutrients, lipids, and fats and things that you need. They don't, which I'm sure I'll say some medical things wrong. I am still not in the medical profession, although I have learned a lot. But they don't give that to you for a while. And basically they had to do it through a PICC line, which goes like right, for him, it was right here, and it goes like to your heart. And they had all these IVs that they were having to move because they constantly busted. One of them like leaked all over his bed and was like, his arm was all swollen, and the nurse didn't even notice it. I was really upset about that. What happened that was strange, and this is another thing I will say, if you're going through this, to look out for and maybe do, especially like if you live somewhere, like we live in Houston, we live near the med center, like go there. Especially if you're having major surgery, just go there. But they didn't have the insurance or whatever to do a PICC line for someone under the age of 18 at their hospital. So then the surgeon says, well, then I'll do it. And I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. That seems weird to me. Like, you are not, like, that doesn't seem like the chain of command, or, you know what I mean? Like, that doesn't seem right. Like, there should be someone that typically does the PICC line that's available at this hospital. So when he said that, I was like, or how about we just transfer to a children's hospital that is equipped for doing things like a PICC line, which has a risk of infection and all of that, and everything. And I am so glad that I suggested that, because he needed to be in the med center. He needed it. So, the surgeon was like, yeah, well, we could do that. That's true. There was another doctor there that she was like a pediatrician that I really liked. And she was like, yeah, that's a possibility. So then they were on the hunt to find a hospital a children's hospital that had a bed open and would take us. So that took like a day. And finally, they did find a hospital in the med center, thank goodness, that would take us. So I had been living at this point in the hospital for 10 whole days. I had a lot of stuff, you know, and I was trying to do yoga. I mean, you know, just trying to do anything I could. At that point, we had a little bit more free time, so I was able to try to do different things, you know. Eventually got to the point where we had like no free time, which I'll get there. But the ambulance, like, it was like we were told we were going to this hospital, and all of a sudden the ambulance people showed up. So I had to just like throw things together. We had like a cart full of stuff, and the ambulance was kind enough to like fit all of my stuff in the front seat so that I could ride with Carter and not have to follow him. Parking downtown is a disaster and everything, and also it was very good that I was in the ambulance with him. I would recommend going with your loved one in the ambulance if you can. So I went with him, and it was pretty scary in the ambulance. Like, I was kind of surprised. Like, it was nighttime. It was very dark. I couldn't really see out. It's very bumpy. We had to drive on the highway. I was not expecting it to be that bumpy. And then Carter is, you know, extremely nauseous. He ended up throwing up bile in the ambulance, which was very rough to deal with. So it was a rough ride for sure. And we actually passed by like all of these cars that were broken down, a car that had flipped over, and then all these cars that were broken down because there were nails on the highway. And they were like, let's hope we get lucky, you know, the ambulance driver or whatever. And I was like, if we flip over in this ambulance, I'm gonna freak out. There were so many times where, like what I told Carter with the NG tube, like, just sometimes you just have to let them do what they need to do to like save your life or take care of you or whatever. Going in that ambulance was very hard for me. I felt like I was going to have a panic attack. I was very scared, and it felt claustrophobic and scary. But I had to do what I had to do. And same with Carter. And then going to the new hospital was really upsetting to me because I felt like we were starting over. I didn't know that 100% yet. I was correct, but I didn't know that 100%, but I had a feeling that's what was happening to us. And that was really hard because I'd already been in the hospital for 10 days. Carter had already been through a surgery and everything. We thought he was supposed to be getting better. I've been away from my young children and my husband. Like, it was really hard. So we got there, and I mean, it's this huge hospital, guys. Huge. I don't know where I am. They take us to this floor, and they put us in this, like, I mean, there are like statues. Like, this place is big, very different to the hospital that I was used to. And they took us to this room that was this tiny little room. Where I slept was like basically in like a window seat, like a window. It was, which the nurse that night, she brought me like a crate, egg crate type thing. Thank goodness, because it was so uncomfortable, much more uncomfortable than the other hospital. And, you know, it was scary. I felt trapped. I felt like I was in a prison. This is just my honest thoughts and feelings. And I was really concerned about starting over for Carter and everything. But we got there, and they didn't jump to surgery again. They made him put the NG tube back in, which was very sad. He was very upset about that. So he went through it for a second time, wide awake. They put that thing down his throat. This time it was smaller. They taped it to the side of his face so it didn't move around as much. So it was much more well done. They actually even did x-rays to make sure it was like the right distance down in his stomach and stuff. It was much more legit, like already, just the NG tube, which is nothing compared to the surgeries and all of that. So then it was waiting again to see if his bowels would move. I remember crying in the shower, saying, I want to go home. I couldn't be crying around Carter. You know, I had to be strong around him. But so I would go cry in the shower, and I would say, I want to go home. I want to go home. I want to go home. Like, please get his bowels moving, you know. And we would walk, and we would do all these things to try to get them moving, and it just wasn't happening. Finally, they did a CAT scan, and they have to put this contrast, this drink, to be able to see properly. And the contrast, it was the first time they had tried to do it, it was failed at the first hospital. He threw it up because it's a ton. It's not just like a little bit. They put it in the NG tube, and it was rough. But the second time, thanks to a nurse that was using an alcohol wipe thing and like moving it in front of his nose and like distracting him and stuff, she was amazing. And he got that contrast down, which was very important because they need to be able to see everything that they saw. So they did that. He did another CAT scan, which is very painful when you had surgery and you have to lay on this flat bed and everything. It's not a bed, it's just like a concrete slab basically. But they did that, and they told me, we don't think there's another bowel obstruction. We think it's just taking time to get his bowels moving again. We think it's going to happen. So I thought, oh my gosh, wonderful news. Thank God. Like, this is a miracle. Wonderful. But then not that much longer after that, they actually came back and said it was the night before his second surgery. They came and said, nope, he does have another bowel obstruction. He's going to have another surgery. And I just went into the hallway, which when you're at a hospital like this, you'll see people just crying in the hallways. Like, it's just kind of how it goes sometimes. I didn't have a car there or anything to go to, and I couldn't cry in the room in front of Carter. So I was just bawling my eyes out, talking to my sister on the phone, telling my husband like that he's gonna have another surgery. It felt like it was so unfair. It was so not right. Why is this happening to us? Why? But we had to do what we had to do. So I did not get good sleep that night. He would like moan in his sleep for a long time, I guess because of the bowel obstruction and everything, because eventually the past like month after his surgeries, he didn't moan like that in his sleep, but I thought he was like dying. I would be waking up, hearing him moaning and groaning, and I would be pressing the call button, calling the nurse like something's wrong with him. Thank God she was so sweet. She was one of the really sweet nurses, and she felt for me. She saw me crying, like she understood what we were going through. So But yeah, I did not sleep well, needless to say, that night. And then the next day, he went into surgery. They told us it would be 3 hours. Just the fact that he was having to have another surgery and that this wasn't fixed, and I was so scared for him, I was just bawling my eyes out. I sat there with my dad and my stepmom, and thank God for them that they were there. Eventually, Carter's dad came and you know, we just sat and waited, and there's a screen that shows like everyone, that's like numbers or whatever of people having surgery, and it will tell you when they're like closing and when it's done or whatever. Everyone's ended. And this happened every single surgery he had there, actually. Everyone's ended. They would send you through an app like updates, but it would just say surgery still progressing as planned. And that was like, it became meaningless. About 6 hours into the surgery, so double the amount of time we thought it was going to take, the surgeon came out for like a bathroom break and told us what was going on. That there was another extreme bowel obstruction that was around a blood source. He had tons of scar tissue. Actually, the first thing she said was, I don't know what that original surgeon did. Like, I don't even know what he did. So that was very upsetting to me, and a lesson learned that you can't trust, just because someone's a surgeon does not mean that you can trust them, and that you shouldn't question them and go to the med center or like the best hospital you can go to, because it does make a difference. So she said that, which was like really upsetting to me, but also I'm glad she said it, because yeah, that was a failed surgery. She said there was just tons of scar tissue all over, adhesions, all over his intestines, basically like this. Like the scar tissue and his intestines, just like that. And his anatomy is very strange, because with the gastroschisis, they had to just shove his intestines back into his body. So your intestines is normally like in a certain place on your body. His is not like that. It's very unique. So she told me, at least when she updated us on what was going on all that scar tissue they were having to remove, and that it was around a blood source and everything, I felt a little better, at least knowing what was happening, but it was still terrifying. We were watching one of the Astros playoff games or whatever, and I would just get these little updates like every hour, and if I didn't get an update, I was going to the front desk people and I was asking for one, and they were very sweet, and they would call back and say, Mom's asking for an update, and then they'd send surgery still progressing as planned. So that went on for 13 hours. I remember it was like midnight or something, and I was laying on this little couch. I could not sleep, but I was laying on this little couch, and I just kind of looked up at the screen and I saw closing. It had finally changed to like closing, and I jumped up and told my dad, like, it's finally closing, you know, and they had been updating people. I was a basket case, so I was not updating like family or anything very much, because of what a basket case I was during this time, but my dad was. And so, you know, it was finally closing, and then it took a little while after that. It was like total of a 13-hour surgery, but it ended up being like 15 hours that we were waiting, because it takes a long time for them to prep and get ready for the surgery. So from sending him off to when it was done was like 15 hours. So the surgeon comes back, and she tells us to sit down. And I knew that that was not a good sign. I didn't think he had died or anything, because I felt like it would be different the way she looked or how she was acting if that was the case. But I knew that, yeah, she didn't just come out and say, we're all done, it worked great. You know, she told us to sit down, so we did. And she said that she was not able to finish the surgery, that he was going to the ICU with his stomach still open. They had like this little piece covering it, but his stomach open still. That he would need at least 2 or 3 more surgeries after that. That he would be in this ICU, heavily sedated, while his stomach is open with an air tube. Not only the NG tube, but also an air tube, you know, like what they put in during surgery usually. So we had to leave. They had to basically swap so that we could get a room in the ICU. So I had to leave, go get all my stuff, leave that room, and bring it all to this ICU. And that took like a few hours of waiting around with all our stuff laying around. It's the middle of the night at the hospital. And finally, they brought us to the room, the ICU. And to get back to the ICU, you have to have like permission from the front desk person to open a door. You have to like wave all of these like automatic doors open and things. And it's kind of a lot of hoops to get back there. So we get back there and it was so hard to see. So hard to see. Carter was in a diaper. That's it. He was heavily sedated, but awake enough to respond. And that was what was really scary too. He had this air tube in him and they would be like, hey, are you hot? You want a fan? And he'd go like this, shake his head and like communicate that way. Very scary, very difficult to see him like that with his stomach open, you know, just a piece covering it, with the air tube and everything. Just terrifying to see. Extremely sad. Just hard, really, really hard. So we were able to get a Ronald McDonald room. Well, I got one, my own Ronald McDonald room, and then his dad, who I'm not with, got his own Ronald McDonald room. And so I am very grateful for that. I don't know if you guys have noticed, like at McDonald's, there's like donations that you can give to the Ronald McDonald House and everything. It makes a big difference. It's not that comfortable, but at least it's a room, you know, to sleep in, because it's very difficult to sleep in the ICU. There's tons of beeping and codes going on. It's a very scary place. And so, I ended up sleeping in that Ronald McDonald room while he was in the ICU. So each night you had to like pack up your stuff, leave the room, because they didn't let you in there from like 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. So you had to pack up your stuff and leave and then come back, you know, and so it was kind of like a lot. I had to really pare down all my stuff and everything. And one day, it was so bad. So Carter was heavily sedated, but like still would communicate. And so, but he's drugged, you know, and so it wouldn't always make sense. And there was one day where I was standing at his bedside for 6 hours and he was repeatedly asking me, pointing, because he couldn't talk with air tube and everything, like pointing at his stomach and going like this, like, what happened? What happened with the surgery? And I would try to explain it to him, and then he would just go in this circle. He would go in this circle constantly. So that day I could not leave the room because I couldn't get all my stuff out and leave. And so luckily they allowed for me to stay and not move my stuff. But it was tough. It was really tough in the ICU. It was a really scary, sad time while he was there. I remember I would sit in on rounds, which is like when the doctors come and stand outside the room and talk about everything that's going on with the patient and everything. I would be fully a part of those rounds every single time. And I would be telling the doctor, why is he so awake? He's not sedated enough. And he said, like, if it were my kid, I would not want him that sedated. Like, I would not want to just like knock him out. It's not good for him long term and everything. And so, hey, what did you get? Yeah.
Okay. So why? Okay, hey, Mama's still filming. So you say hi to her now, and then we'll go back inside, okay?
I'll come back in a minute, okay?
But I want to sit there.
No, because I'm still filming, but I'll be done soon, okay? Another little break saying hi to my little ones. So, and it was important for me to be a part of those rounds. I would say definitely if you're trying to advocate for your loved one, be a part of that if you can. And they thought they were going to have to do like another surgery. So how did it go? I'm starting to like go blank. It's such a long story. But basically, they ended up taking out his air tube for a little bit in between his like fourth surgery, like third and fourth surgery, that they were continuing to try to get everything together again. And so they waited until like he wasn't using the air tube to breathe. They can tell on the monitor like it's his own breaths. They took him off the sedation because he can't be sedated when he's trying to breathe on his own. And then they had his pain under control and they slowly took him off of this air tube. And it was very calm, and like a doctor came in, was like, okay, are we ready? All right, let's take it off. And it was good. Well, then after his fourth surgery, the final surgery that he's had, it did not go so smoothly. So I'll talk about that in a second. But basically we're in the ICU for like the next couple surgeries. And that fourth surgery, the doctor came out and said she was not able to put it together. He was going to have an ileostomy and a mucus fistula for 3 months until hopefully they can put his intestines back together again. Which I think she has high hopes and high confidence that she will be able to, but, you know, nothing's certain. So that was the last surgery that he had. I think the surgery before that, I'm like blanking on his third surgery, but it was just like, again, getting the rest of the scar tissue. But then they were hoping to like put things back together with the fourth surgery, but they weren't able to do that. So that was really hard for me to hear. The ostomy was always a possibility, but it was not something that I wanted to have happen. But when he was in the ICU after the fourth surgery, they were like, okay, let's take this air tube out. 'Cause of course they had to put it back in for his other surgeries. And it was like all of a sudden they just decided. So this is another situation where I would say you can say stop. You can tell, I don't care if it's like 5 doctors in the room and you. Like, you tell those doctors to stop, wait, explain to you what's going on, because they all started barging into the room and I was like, is this an emergency? That's what's going on. And she said, no, it's not an emergency. So I thought, okay, you know, but if after she said it's not an emergency, I should have had them stop and explain to me what they were trying to do. But basically they just all of a sudden decided to take his air tube out. His pain was not well managed. He was in extreme pain. They had not waited to watch him take breaths on his own. They had not lowered the sedation enough. He was still pretty sedated. So when they took it out, it took about 30 minutes of me begging him to breathe for him to start breathing again. I would say 1, 2, 3, breathe, Carter, breathe. He's like halfway sedated. He's screaming in pain. He would always say his pain level, like they'd ask me on a scale of 1 to 10, so much lower than it really was. I'd always be like, Carter, you need to give him like a higher number, but he's so tough. But he was like saying his pain was a 10, and like he just could not breathe because of how much pain he was in. And there was a nurse that was saying, like, I don't think it's realistic to ask him to breathe right now because of how much pain he's in. And on top of that, he was still somewhat sedated. So it was ridiculous. But after like 30 minutes, he finally started breathing again. But it was one of the most terrifying experiences of my life, of the whole situation. And they should not have handled it that way. It was way too fast and it made no sense why they just all barged in and did that. So I wish I had stopped them. I wish I had understood that I could do that. But we made it through. He was in the ICU, I think, for like a couple days after his fourth surgery. And then they moved us to a regular floor again. And that was for his recovery, but not fully, you know, because he still has this... he still has the ostomy and everything. Getting the ostomy bag. So it's basically, you have like your stoma, you have a part of your intestines that's like outside of your body. And, that's like where a type of output poop, I guess, comes out. And, it was constantly leaking. It would not stay on. There was a day we changed the bag like 7 times. And this is someone who has an incision from his underwear line to like up to here. He has an incision that is still extremely painful. And we are ripping a bag off and pressing it back onto him. Even with pain medication, they had to give him Dilaudid, which is like a stronger pain medication than morphine. Even with that, he was still in a ton of pain. It was miserable. This was like 3 weeks at least of struggling with this ostomy bag, constantly leaking, and it just being a horrible experience, basically. I never imagined it would be this difficult and this much work. But it got to the point where I was the best at it. We had an amazing nurse, my favorite nurse. She figured out how to like put these kind of wedges around the bag with paste covering them, and that helped with the leaking. And then also, as his incision around the stoma healed, the stoma finally stuck out more because it had just flattened, and so all of it was leaking onto the bag and degrading it and coming out. So it did kind of stick out a little bit more eventually. But, you know, due to some amazing nurses and then me learning how to do this, like that was another situation where I would be kind of nervous, you know, and so I'd be letting this new nurse, who it's like the first night she's had us, trying to put the ostomy bag, she's doing it all wrong, like all wrong. And some of them don't listen to me. Like the good ones, like our favorite nurse, she would listen to me in my insight and what I had learned from the wound care nurse and everything. Some of them don't listen. And at that point was another time where I should have said, stop what you're doing. Let me do this. But I was so nervous about it. But eventually it got to that point where I would do the whole thing myself, because I had learned how to do it better than anyone, because I was with him all the time, watching the wound care nurses and everything. We had a meeting where there were 25 people. We called a meeting. That's something you should do if you feel like there's communication breakdown between your doctors and nurses and the whole team. Have a meeting, talk to like the manager of, not even just the charge nurse, but the manager, and she will call a meeting where they are required to come, like the surgeon, everyone is required to come to this meeting. And that was really good to get on the same page, like, because of all the communication issues. But yeah, they kept telling me it would get better with the ostomy bag, but I like did not believe them because it had been 3 weeks and it was not getting better. But one day it finally did, because I started doing it. I started taking control of it. And, you know, from everything I have learned. And so then it was just, at that point, they decided we needed to do refeeding, which I explained earlier. And that was another thing where it wasn't just like, oh, we have an ostomy bag. Boom. This is how you take care of it. It was never black and white like that. There was always a struggle with the refeeding. They put it through this tiny little tube, this tiny little pump that's meant for formula. So I mean, this is gross, but there's like chunks in his poop from his output that I literally have to mix up his poop with saline to dilute it and then literally filter out the chunks so that it won't get clogged going through this refeeding thing. So that took a lot of trial and error. Our favorite nurse basically figured that out as well, how best to do that. And yeah, like some other nurses would try to do it and it would just fail miserably. And so it got to the point where like we would love to go home, but the bag was not staying on. The refeeding was a struggle. So it took a month. They had told us 7 to 10 days after his last surgery we would go home. No, it took a month, a little over a month, I think, after his last surgery that we were finally able to go home. One big thing was his bag has to be emptied constantly at night because ileostomies have such high output. And they had tried to use like a tube to like go into a bag and like drip in there, but it would never work. Like a catheter situation type thing. Coming from his bag, it never worked. I was telling them for weeks, I need a bigger bag. Like he needs to wear a huge bag at night. And they never listened to me until this other wound care nurse came back from vacation. And she finally listened to me and she overnighted this bag. We tried it and it worked. So then we went home on Thanksgiving Day. They were trying to get us home by Thanksgiving. We literally went home on Thanksgiving Day. And I was very nervous because it did not mean that we were going home and Carter was better. It meant that we were going home to me doing the majority of his care. And I knew it would be a transition. I mean, there's tons of supplies and things that he needs. It's just a lot. But hopefully this is just for 2 months. Then we'll go back to the hospital for his final surgery. But it is a lot. And then it's teaching him how to take responsibility to empty his own bag and things. He has tons of medication he takes. So I got this pill box to organize that. It takes a lot of time and effort. We're still having to change his bag twice, which is supposed to last 3 to 5 days. But we still have to change it morning and night, basically. All of the supplies that they were supposed to send us did not come because of the holiday, because we left on Thanksgiving. But then also they forgot a part. And so, right, like today's Sunday, and they're closed. Like no one's answering my text messages of the company that's supposed to be delivering the stuff. So I have had to wake up every 2 hours and empty his bag for him because we're out of the big, we finally got the big bags, but then we don't have this other piece that attaches to it. They forgot to send it to us. So on Monday, hopefully they will get that overnighted. So for multiple nights, I am having to set an alarm and wake up every 2 hours to empty his bag. Otherwise it will explode and, get everywhere and it'll be a big mess. So that's kind of where we're at now, basically. It's a very long story. Sorry that it was so long. But I try to tell it as quickly as possible, but it's a very long story and I'm sure I left out a ton of details. It's a very detailed, long story, but Carter is going to live And that is what's most important. But I am exhausted living in the hospital that long, being away from my family for that long. Very, very difficult. Seeing my kid go through hell and back, extremely difficult. But he is going to live, and he will hopefully get this ostomy thing reversed and things will get better. But we're still kind of in the thick of it now, adjusting to being at home and me doing all of his care and everything. It's going to be tough. It's going to be tough, but we are strong. We made it through so much together. Me and Carter, our family is strong. Like, we are fighting through this. Carter is still with us, and it's been quite a journey. I have learned so much, so much. So I hope that, if anything, you guys learned to advocate for your loved ones in the hospital and everything, or just I wanted to share with you guys our story. So that's our story so far. And thank you if you listened all the way to the very end. It's a very long story, so I appreciate you for doing that. And if you feel led to donate to our GoFundMe, that will really help out our family right now during this time. And I truly appreciate every single one of you that has donated. It just blows my mind. It means the world to me. And yeah, follow me on Instagram, because I do try to post more up-to-date stuff, day-to-day stuff on my Instagram stories and everything. But yeah, that's our story. That's our life right now. We're fighters. We're getting through it. It's been hard as hell, but Carter is here and we're making it. You know what I mean? You don't know how you'll react to something like this happening until you go through it. I definitely have run on adrenaline this whole time, and I've had breakdowns. I've had my little place where I would go cry in the hospital. It's been tough, and I definitely complain and get upset and everything, but we just have to put one foot in front of the other, take it one day at a time. Oh, I'll leave with this. One really good advice that a doctor gave us is that don't look at it day by day when you're in the hospital, because you'll go crazy, because you'll take one step forward, 2 steps back, constantly. But think of it a week before. A week before, Carter was much sicker. We were struggling with a bag there. The week before that, he was much sicker. If you look at it week to week, you can see the improvement, how much better you're doing. But day to day, it can be hard to see. So anyway, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll hopefully see you in a future video, if not on Instagram.